Hey, here we go. Once again, this is Johnny Cinco with another podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And this is the professional, the road to mastery. We left off with we left off with chapter one of life's tasks. And I just wanted to add a little bit to that on episode three of this podcast and kind of give you the glimpse of what it was to one come into the military and to kind of the way my path went as far as branching off into what ultimately became the mastery of what my profession is, and then kind of what this is today as we kind of talk about a podcast. And so once again, I'm always glad for you guys to show up, to tune in. Thanks for family and friends, co-workers, good friends of mine that we work together as we kind of embrace this journey with me. So again, thank you so much. So then let's talk about it, right? 20 years. I got about 20 years in the military. But before that, I grew up in a small town called London, and two parents, immigrants from Mexico, first generation born here in the United States. And I always wasn't the greatest student. All right, so let's just talk about the education portion of it, right? This traditional schooling. I wasn't the greatest. I wasn't a straight A student. I wasn't even a good student at all. I think I always liked freedom. I always liked, playing. Wasn't never a professional of anything. I was just playing any sport, in the street ball, street football, soccer, baseball. Kind of those early 90s kids where you seen a Disney movie, they call it Sandlot, the Mighty Ducks, even though there was no really hockey where I grew up. But anything that kind of was in during the time, there was a moment in time where, I was into chess for some reason, So whatever the, at that moment in time was in, I was in on it, I was doing those type of things. But that was kind of my growing up. I didn't have a lot. My parents, my mom, she provided what she could, and my dad as well. I mean, even though at a really young age they split up, but I kind of grew up moving back and forth from my mom's and my dad's, and school wasn't really a something I excelled at. And I know for sure, like many people in my town growing up, it was about labor jobs. Right? It was about being a hard worker. It was about, doing, again, I was surrounded by orchards, fields of, grapes. So my mom at one point, well, really young, she used to be a manager in the fields, and she would manage the people to bring them to the sites, and then they would do all the hard labor. So around where I grew up, hard labor was kind of the key, right? So there wasn't really nobody there to teach you, like, this is how you go to, college. Or I don't think, in the moment in time where I grew up, family members or friends that I grew up with went to go college, right? So I just didn't know that. My mind at a real young age was kind of forced to think like I'm going to be a laborer. This is what I'm going to be. Or the other activities that were happening within my small town, and so that's what happened, right? So I got suspended a lot, so I fought a lot in school. I got in trouble a lot in school. I got kicked out from at fourth grade. I think I was I was in Selma. It's a small town, also, or now a little bit bigger. That has grown. I got kicked out of two elementary schools at fourth grade. And eventually, my dad at some point had to sit next to me in class to see how, what's going on with my son in class. I was a troublemaker. I talked back. But honestly, I defended myself. Win, lose, or draw, I always fought back. Never really, I hated being bullied. And if they try to bully me, I would fight back. And like I said, win, lose, or draw. That was me at a very young age, and it's hard, right? Because as a young age, I would move, from my mom into my dad's house. So then I found myself like going to a small elementary, new kids, and then I'm the new kid. So then guess what? They picked on me, right? And and I would fight back, and then eventually it gets suspended, right? Because one thing I just didn't know is how to talk to like elders and tell them like, hey, this is what happened. Eventually, they just kind of saw, the friends that were there. They just took the side of the other kid that kind of grew up in that elementary, and then I was the one going home being suspended. And then, eventually again moved back to London with my mom, but then go to Kings River, which is a small elementary as well. And again, I would talk back to teachers. I would rebel. This is third, fourth grade. I was already kind of in this trajectory of just being, a screw up. And and then there was moments in time, as a child that I wanted to do good, right? I wanted to do the right thing. There was a moment in time where, spirituality was what I was looking for. And I started doing, Sundays in church, being a altar boy. But it was thanks to my aunt, mi tia Maria, that she was really, and then my mom and my dad. But my tia Maria at the time was really a blessing in disguise. A blessing, a saint. She was one of my aunts that helped, raise me with my cousins, and I didn't have any brothers, but my cousins were like my brothers, and they help also, and then my female cousins as well helped raise me as well. So I'm grateful for the community I grew up in, because even if I was messing up, they always kind of embraced me or took me in. So when I would get suspended at times from school, I was, like I said, I was a troublemaker. So I would get suspended, and I wouldn't get the slips. I would get the slip, meaning I'm suspended, and instead of taking it to my mom, because my mom was old school mom. If I got in trouble, my mom would just give me a licking, give me a whooping, and then I thought to myself, well, if I'm gonna get this ass whooping, then I'm gonna get it, and that's it. But then I just continued doing the same thing. So sometimes, these rebellious kids like myself that grew up in those times where you get your lick, and then you're thinking like, okay, maybe he might understand, but I was hard headed, and my sisters kind of remember my my hard headedness when I was growing up. So again, that was the thing, right? For me, it was just like not liking discipline or order. And so eventually, there was moments in time where I wanted to do good. And there's one that's like perfectly, that kind of stands out. There's a couple of them, but one I remember, this was around fourth grade, fifth grade, and I was in school, and I was really trying to, fourth or fifth grade, and I was trying to like say, I'm tired of fighting, I'm tired of just doing what I was been doing, and I want to change, right? And I already had the stigma of just being a rebellious kid, getting suspended, and there was we were playing, usually we're playing racquetball, like a form of baseball, right, with a racket, with a tennis racket. And I remember when I had this tennis racket, right, and I'm swinging it or whatever, and then one of the my peers goes to the pitching, and kind of softball pitches me the ball, and I'm have the racket, right, I'm in on base, and then I swing the racket. But when I swing the racket on the way back, there was a kid behind me, and I didn't see him. So when I didn't see him, he gets hit in the face with the racket. And all I remember is like hearing and he's holding his face, and he's holding his face in, and he's seeing that he got hit with the racket, or I just seen he got hit with the racket. And seeing this, I'm like, oh, I knew right there and then, like, hey, are you okay? Things like that. But the teacher didn't care, right? Or I tried to explain it was an accident. It was an accident, and I got suspended for like 3 days or something like that. And a lot of times during these suspensions, there was no daycare where I grew up. There was nobody there to like take care of me, or maybe they kind of my aunt could have probably took care of me, but again, I just didn't want to tell my mom. So sometimes I would just, chill right there at the arcade at one of the local little markets we had there, little store, corner store. And there was like a little area where they had Street Fighter, and I would just go in there and play video games the entire time until school. And then I would act like I went to school like around 2:30, whatever the buses. I could hear the buses, where I knew kind of the time when the buses would come, and then I just walk to my house. Like I said, man, I was a little hoodlum growing up, always getting into trouble, and even at times trying to do right, and I would still mess up. So eventually, I get move over. My mom moves to a different school, a different location. I mean, Dinuba instead of London, and I start going to sixth grade in middle school now. Back then, I guess it was called junior high. And again, same story. Where there was moments in time where I do maybe first semester good grades, and then the second semester bad grades, and then ultimately, you get to eighth grade, hanging around with the wrong kids. There was a moment in time in seventh grade I wanted to be, in flag football, and I just didn't have the grades. They said, hey, the coach kind of pulled me to the side and was like, hey, I really like you as a lineman. You're a little husky kid, and but you don't have the grades to be in the class. And I was really hyped. I was really hyped to do it, but didn't have the grades. So then, at that moment in time, it was kind of like, okay, well then, every time there were some letdowns, right? There was like, hey, I want to do this. I want to do right. I want to, maybe do something with, as a child, but then there's always like a setback, right? So then, I said, F it. I'm just going to be what I'm supposed to be, which is, probably a gangbanger, a hoodlum, thief, criminal, all these different things. Because I guess that was kind of like my path, right? Even at that seventh grade, I was already thinking about that. Like that's what I'm gonna be. And then in eighth grade, I remember, getting again suspended, not as frequently, but eventually. The moment came to graduate on stage, and then I had the GPA. I had like a 1.8 or 9, and I ended up talking to the counselor, and the counselor at the middle school was like, well, you can tell when your teachers to give you some type of grades, right, and maybe you can graduate on stage. And I didn't. I was like, they're not gonna give me it, so they just pushed me to high school. And high school was about the same, right? Again, I wasn't a real good kid in school. There was always like a semester where I would do great in school, straight A. So I knew, I had the capabilities to have good grades, if I just kind of dedicated the time to kind of and focus. And, there was teachers there that really took interest in me. There was a teacher there that was not really a teacher at the time. He eventually became a teacher. But he was the on-campus suspension. I got suspended a couple of times. So instead of now, I guess they caught on. Well, instead of sending kids to home because they probably weren't staying home or the parents were working, they made an on-campus suspension high school. So that's where I was. I was in campus suspension high school. And then he kind of, one of the teachers there was pretty much kind of offered me something. He goes, if you get, straight A's and for your first semester, I think it was, I'll take you, I'll bring, a pizza or something like that, pizza or hamburger or McDonald's, something like that, right? And very simple, gesture, but I took the challenge on, right? And I did, I got straight A's and he did. He brought either the pizza or hamburger, don't remember, but yeah, like he did that. And but again, right, there was like a reward to it. So then the following semester, it was like, all right, well, I got D's, C's, and things like that. And then eventually, I was just going the wrong path again. And the offer came to move to Detroit. My father had the year prior moved to Detroit, and he offered me to move with him. And to be honest, that was kind of like the turning point for me, was moving to Detroit. I think I had let my family down a lot. The trajectory of where I was going wasn't positive at all. Um, and I had lost myself, lost what it was, always conforming, and it was those outside energies, that was those things that I accepted that I was gonna be because that's what I was exposed to. Um, and and the moment in time again when I would find myself trying to be better at, I was always kind of still with the stigma of you're not good enough, or you're not. This is not you. You're supposed to be the kid that's the criminal, right? The kid that uh, doesn't progress, and I accepted it. I accepted that, and it was hard, right? It was hard, especially as a kid. I was 15 when I moved to Detroit, almost 16, and in my mind, I just didn't have like a goal. Um, in between those times, right, of when I was saying that I was like uh, doing bad in school, my father, would work. So, like for example, at 11 years old, I worked with my mom. She lived in a small house, and the owner of the home managed home. I mean, he owned homes. So then, at 11 years old, my mom offered like, hey, the man needs worker. Do you mind, or do you want to work with him? He just needs somebody to help him with his homes. And I did. I did carpentry. I was just a laborer. Like I said, I was a hard worker. And again, hard work was always something that was valued where I grew up. Um, and my father always was a labor worker. So, my mom, worked in Reese Foods, and, always a hard worker. So to me, that's what, I guess maybe that was what I was supposed to do. So then, I worked in the summers, sometimes in the weekends with this guy, about 11 years old, at 12 years old, working as a janitor in El Monterey and Kingsburg, just working, cleaning toilets, and on the summer to get, clothes for myself, for high school. And then, so just like any jobs that I would do. And then one summer, again, when my dad moved to Detroit, I went with him. And so eventually, fast forward, right, this is the summer of when I'm 15. I started working roofing, a landscaping, so just labor jobs, in Detroit, around Ann Arbor. That's kind of the first time I ever moved to a location where I found Hispanics that didn't speak Spanish. When I remember one time roofing in Dearborn, this was I think the chief of police home, and one of the guys had hired us, and I was there. Like I said, I was 16 years old, and I'm here just tearing down the roof, sun beaming on you. And if you ever done roofing, the sun is almost like twice as hot up there because of the shingles, they kind of shine, they reflect on you. So you're out there just tearing it down. And I remember I think one of the things that just like sticks to me even to this day was after that roofing job, we were done, and the guy was like, hey, well, I'll pay you extra, or I'll just pay you your guys' money today if we're done in 6 hours. And I think we were done like within 5, but he only gave us like in cash maybe 90% of what we were supposed to get paid. And his whole goal was, I'll give you 90%, and then you'll show up the next day, or the next work day, and get paid the rest, the 10% plus whatever. But what I was getting at is when I finished the roofing, the chief of police daughter kind of stopped and looked at me and said, "Are you Mexican?" And that was the first time I ever kind of was exposed to that, because again, where I grew up in California, it was all, the majority were Hispanics, Latinos, Mexicans, So and then there were some white, and at one point there was a black family in London, but reality was all just Hispanics. And everybody knew Spanish. So then fast forward again, I'm 16, doing this roofing job, and then seeing this little girl say that. And it's her innocence, right? And I said, yeah, I am Mexican, right? She just smiled, and that was it. But again, I was never exposed to other cultures or other, again, I worked roofing with a Puerto Rican. So this is kind of where I think my mind kind of expanded a little bit more to what was out there outside of just a small town of London, and doing all this dumb stuff I was doing growing up. and started hanging around with more Hispanics, more Latinos, so but more engaged as far as like older uh, people that my dad exposed me to, and I started reading Spanish a little bit more. And what I remind myself during that time is I just carry a lot of trauma. I carry a lot of resentment. I carry a lot of anger, and it was just my situation. Of course, there's probably worse situations that a kid can go through, but in my mind, during that time, that was probably the worst, right? And that led me to doing really, all of my rebellious time, my resentment, my anger, towards others. So, there was a book. Again, my dad is, always read a lot. I always seen him read a lot, and he always had books around, and but the majority were in Spanish, because again, my dad spoke Spanish, and maybe he never, there was times where he would be reading the Bible and would tell me, "Hey, Johnny, come over here, and then I'll read you." He'd read me like some scripture. And do I remember what he read? No, but just the example of him just reading or seeing that he had books around, and I, that kind of led me to pick up books. And one of the books was the Hijos del Caos. It's in Spanish, but there was an experience in there that was so raw. So whoever, I don't even remember the author, but there was a collection of different experiences. And I realized, like, as I was reading these books, or that book specifically, was like, I was always interested in books that were about life, like about somebody's life path, or somebody's, journey, to either, getting better at life, kind of like the self-help 12 steps, all these different types of books. And this one was, the Hijos del Caos, and it was in Spanish. And what I'm grateful for is during that time, I read a lot of Spanish books, and I even got better at my Spanish because, again, really wasn't into education. So I read this book, and this book kind of, and a certain experience kind of hit my traumas, and I was just tired of just carrying these resentments. So, I went to a priest, and I confessed. And maybe it wasn't confessing like the things that I've done, but just the things that I've carried. And I just needed somebody to listen. I just needed somebody to hear what I had to say. So I went to the priest, and I remember thinking to myself before I went into the confessional, was like it was going to be a kind of a closed one, right, where you don't see the priest, but you can kind of see him through the netting of the, that's how it was going to be. But it wasn't. It was kind of, I opened the door, and it was open. So what I did, I just sat in the corner, closed my eyes, and I just kind of just vomited, right? Vomited everything I was carrying, and my life experience, and just the things that I was trauma about. And I just let it all out that day, because, again, I really, in my mind, in my heart, I wanted a change in my life. So then this experience that I had after, of like just like a weightlifting off me, was so, I don't know how to explain it, like a spiritual experience, you can say. And the following weekend I did the same. I went back to the priest, because I felt like maybe there were some things that I had missed, or didn't talk about, and I just wanted to know that I just wanted to let go, right? Of all this trauma, of all this resentment and anger and things that happened in my life. So then I was like, you know what, I'm going to just say it. So then I did. Went the second Saturday, and I just let it out again. This time I was kneeling, and this time the priest, I guess, remembered me and started asking me questions, and I just kind of blurted it out. And I think that was the change, right? Or I know for a fact that was the change that kind of catapulted me into something else. Now there was still, straggling of who I was, right? I'm 16, 17 years old, but in that moment in time, like, that experience, and just being around my Hispanic people, and just kind of figuring out, like, maybe, I can help others, with my life experience. And, at 16, 17, what experience do I really have in life to kind of provide to any, like, older person, right, that's going through some type of struggle in life, either it be drugs, alcohol, divorce, like, there wasn't really a life lived to be able to help anybody, but I was determined even at that young age. So I had listened to a couple of books and or a couple audio books, a couple of talks, speakers, and I really enjoyed the those comedians back then. There was comedians that would sell their tapes, and I remember my dad would always buy these the Polo Polo and just all these different comedians, and listening to them in audio and tape, and then listening to as we drove somewhere, he would put on this tape and listen to the audio. So I was really like an audio person, always talking about life experience, and that's kind of like what I enjoy to read. So fast forward, right? I'm in high school, Holy Redeemer Catholic High School. That's where I was. That's where I went. My dad was able to get a grant for me to go there. And again, it's a little bit more of the same where, I kind of understood, my dad was sacrificing a lot for me to kind of change my life around. I'm grateful for what he did, and everything that he surrounded me by, just positive people to change my life around. And eventually, I moved back to California. I graduated high school from Holy Redeemer Catholic High School in Detroit. I moved back to California because, again, I just, I think my path was back to California. But, I get there and I'm 17, 18 years old. I graduate high school, and then I moved in with my mom. I moved in back with my mom. And I started working at a catering company inside of Reese Foods. And that's where I met the manager. His name was Fernando. And I remember, I was a stock boy. I was a guy that was stocking stuff in the catering company. This was like a little small business inside the inside Reese Foods. So, people would, if they forgot their lunch or didn't want to bring lunch, they would provide the lunch to them. They had, well, not provide it, but they would sell it. So they had, food, hot food, and drinks, and Red Bulls and Cokes and, whatever it is that, he sold there. And I was the one, restocking all the drinks. If the truck came in with meat, I would put it in the freezer, and then, just all around, just, a stock boy in there. And then one day I remember, you get these letters in the mail for colleges. And then I remember getting in the mail a little slip of San Joaquin Valley College, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna and I just grabbed it. I had other colleges, but again, I didn't really have good grades. And to be honest, like, I didn't see myself ever asking my parents to fund my education, I guess you can say. So I just kind of grabbed it and put it under just put it in my drawer in the room that I stayed at my mom's home. And my mom didn't really ask for much from me. I guess they were just happy to have me. Again, I was the troubled kid. I was the one always getting into trouble. So I think they were just happy to have me be alive, I guess you can say, right? And I'm thankful for that. So eventually, I graduate. I working there, and then I decided to go to college. And it was one of those things where, I'm there stocking some meat in the freezer, and I look to my left, and I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was, working in the catering company, and I think he was one of the cooks, and he was cutting the meat. And I just thought to myself, like, do I want to be that guy? Do I want to be 50, 60 years old, cutting meat, still working at this company or at this, catering company? And I was like, I don't want to do that. So then I remember, shortly after, I go to the same little drawer that I had this piece of paper in with San Joaquin Valley College, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go do this. So I went to the counselor. I went and signed, I went in there, got the counseling, and, signed up for, student assistance, and it only covered a couple, and then my mom was okay with signing the rest so that I can go to college. And to be honest, like, again, I never was academic. I never liked school, but I just knew, like, I just needed to have some type of education, some type of college. I just didn't want to be, that 65-year-old guy working at that company. So I was just like, I'm going to go to college. And initially, I wanted to be a computer tech. I wanted to work in computer tech. And I don't know why I thought I wanted to be that, or that's coming something what I wanted. Again, I'm talking about just life's task, and that's kind of like where we're getting at, right? So I went for computer technician, and then they convinced me toward the end of the counseling to be a business administration, and I was just like, all right, like they did, and then the lady was like, they do computers there. I was like, okay, I'll do that, I guess, and I did. And I signed up, and I remember kind of asking the question like, so you're telling me in 18 months if I just stick around, do what you ask me to do, this is all the curriculum from beginning to end. 18 months later, I'll get a degree. And they're like, yes. And I remember asking, the lady like about uh, two or three times to repeat herself, like, so you're telling me if I start here now and I finish then, this is what it is, right? And yes. And I was like, okay. And and I did. I just signed up, and guess what? I graduated, right? I just started, and man, there was days that I would work in the morning. Again, I worked at a catering company, and the good thing about working there, I mean, to be honest, is that Fernando would pay me for 8 hours. I would work 8 hours, and then so I would work from I think 8 to 2, and then have like an hour, 2 hours off, and then at 5, I was in college, and from 5 to like 10 o'clock at night. And I did that for 18 months, and I sucked at typing. Even to this day, I always make fun of like me, Martinez, me. I mean, the last thing I had to do was the typing thing, and I suck at typing. But at the same time, there's things that you can work on. So I was like trying to graduate, and that was the last thing I had to do was like, I think I had to do 40 words per minute, which is not hard at all. I ended up doing it, but it's just, my hard-headedness, and I ended up again finishing. That was the last thing I did, and I graduated in 2020 or 2004, because I graduated high school in 2002. So then 2004, I graduated from college. I remember it should have been probably a good feeling, right? Graduated from college, probably, in my family, right, direct family, I was the first one to graduate from college. And, my sisters were LVNs, and they had their certificates, and they were kind of like the first example of like, maybe we can do something outside of what I expected myself to be. But, I was the first one to graduate college. But I remember seeing my sisters there, my family there, and they were proud. They were proud to see that their brother, that was, growing up, always getting into trouble, always getting suspended, always with bad grades. Did I have a 4-point GPA? No, I didn't. Did I have a 3-point? No, I had a 2.86. And I remember this specifically because they asked me in the graduation, there was people that were like, they were saying their GPA, they're like 3.8, and their name and, their degree. And then I seen mine, I was like a 2.86. And they were like, do you want to say your GPA? And I was like, nah, I'm good. All I care about is that degree. And, but either way, however, if it was scrawling that, scratching the walls, whatever the case may be, again, man, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, man. I just a nose, nose deep, just getting after it, grinding, like however we get there, but we're gonna get there, and I'm not gonna stop, and that's kind of the heart, that's kind of the mindset, that's kind of the things that always, I always carry with myself. Like I might not be the smartest guy, but man, it's gonna be hard for me to quit. And there was good days and bad days there in college. There was, days I was tired, and eventually, I got an opportunity to be a lead, right, in Reese Foods. Again, my mom worked there. My dad ended up working there later on after he moved back from Detroit, and he was working in the bakery, and ended up being a lead in the graveyard shift. And again, right, goes to life tasks. And I just didn't like the food industry. And no offense to the food industry, I think it's a great field. But that's all I had experience in, right? I was a manager in a catering company that, catered. That catering company, I'm thankful because it gave me that attention to detail. because as you're preparing the food, you have to kind of present a specific way. And sometimes, during these catering events, the sometimes the food is what kind of makes the party, right? So it has to have a specific design, a specific layout. Like, how do you lay this food out? Seeing, the from raw materials to be made to something for somebody to consume. When I was in Reese Foods, you see, I was working as a lead for pre-batch, but there's also was bakery. There's also the kitchen. So pre-batch was all the cold kind of raw materials, and the kitchen was the beans. The kitchen, the hot materials that had to be cooked, and then the bakery was the tortillas that were for the assembly line. So for the assembly line. So then I found myself where, so for the assembly line. So then, fast forward, I worked there. I just didn't like the job. That wasn't for me. During my college time, I remember there was somebody there. There was a female that was in my same college degree program. So it was about 36 of us that started the program, and only 3 of us graduated from that program. And I think she had a twin sister, and her twin sister was in the Army, and she was talking about being in Germany. And I just remember hearing that. Backwards again, right? In Detroit, I remember 9/11 had happened while I was in Detroit, and I remember when I graduated high school in Holy Redeemer. Forgot his name. He was a sociology teacher, but I remember making a joke and telling him I was going to join the Army, right? And then he was like, "Don't join the Army," right? Because again, I guess he foreseen, what was about to happen. And I seen that, right? But I didn't pay no mind to it. Didn't pay nothing, anything towards what was that. So then, I ended up, at that time working at Reese Foods, and I went and I tried to do my best I could, but I knew I didn't have experience. Like, I was a brand new lead, but with no processing plant experience to be able to teach or mentor or tell these people like, hey, this is how you do this, or this is what it was. I was just a manager, and maybe some people are good at that, but not me. So I ended up not doing so well, and they offered me a different position there in the company. But I remember during the time I was already talking to a recruiter to join the military, because one thing I thought to myself is, if I join the Army, they'll give me experience, so then I can work somewhere else. And honestly, I was thinking about working in a bank, like being a banker or something like that. And the reason why I just thought that way, because I thought my business administration, and honestly, I might have been able to just apply for a bank and work in a bank directly from that. But I just thought to myself, nah, I'm just going to join the Army. And I remember also a character, something that I thought I had not developed at the time was a character to be able to tell somebody what to do. Because even if I was a lead supervisor and a manager, there was a struggle with me telling somebody what to do if I didn't know. I just didn't know what they were doing, so I didn't know how to explain it, didn't know how to break it down. And that was kind of my struggle as a lead. So I told my dad and family I'm joining the Army, and everybody was upset because, again, I already had a good job, and, I had a degree, and this is Iraq, Afghanistan, 2005. This is both wars going on, and they're like, well, what are you doing? Why are you joining the Army? And I was like, I got to join the Army. And that was it, right? That was 2005, right? I'm ready to go into the Army. I'm 21 years old at the time. So you had some life experience, right? I had some struggles, had some things that kind of created that moment in time of me joining the Army. And to be honest, again, kind of the same concept as before. I wanted to join the Army so I can get more money for college to get my bachelor's degree. And if it's only 4 years, then I want to do 4 years. But something I can tell you where it goes back to those niches, right? So when I was in Detroit, I was 17 years old, and I remember opening up a rehab center in Detroit. It was called Prisoners in Liberation. And that was through, donations. I was able to open up this home and maintain it for a while, from just donations, and then just volunteer contributions. And I always wanted to help others. And then in turn, as I was helping others, I was just helping myself. Right? I mean, like, I was learning from that life experience and learning that, um, you know, um, that giving to others without anything in return, the blessings come, and be part of that, be part of somebody's journey was something that just really called to me. And it was a struggle because, when you're trying to help people that, with addictions, with alcoholism, it's very hard because, it's fairly easy for them to go back than to get clean. So then fast forward, I remember I was talking about these audio tapes, and I talked about it on the previous podcast, but this priest that was talking in the audio tape talked about, being of service, um, and that really called to me. So then, and that's kind of like a nickname for the military, which, you're joining the service, right? You're joining the service, and you're kind of helping, or you're volunteering, and you're serving your country. So that's what it was. So that's probably what my calling was, and just get the experience. But really, it hit me once I was in BCT. Like when I was in basic combat training, I was scared. I just didn't know. I mean, what to expect. You getting yelled at. You get your bags. You're learning how to, on your reception. There was a guy there. He was Puerto Rican. I forgot his name. Real good dude. Real good guy. He came from Lackland, and Lackland Air Force Base. So his English wasn't that great. So he went to Lackland to learn English, I guess the English school. And then, he was there for a couple months. And then once he got to us, he was like, he was a stud. He was physically gifted, a good dude. And, he was teaching us like how to fold our beds and stuff like that. And to tell you, like, no one in my family has joined the army before me. The same way as, like, no one went to college before me, right? Or I mean, maybe they had, but just didn't finish the degree. But no one really was there to tell me. So the same thing, like, I went and joined the army with no preparation, just like, all right, here I am, let's do this. And I was just absorbing everything. But I think maybe in a way that was the sponge I needed, because during that time, you had those drill sergeants that came from, OIF, OEF, the first, wave of Iraq, Iraqi campaign, sergeants. Same thing with the, you know, um, Afghanistan. They were kind of like that first or second wave. So then they became drill sergeants because, again, right, some of them were getting close to retirement. And now I understand, but at the time you're like, why didn't these guys just stay in? But again, they were close to getting retired. And so why go back to war and risk their life? Because a lot of them were like some infantrymen and combat arms, and a couple, were support MOSs. But again, I was a sponge. Um, and I enjoyed BCT. Um, and the reason why I enjoyed it was because, I just absorbed everything. Like, I took everything, like, if this is what they're training me to do, this is going to save my life. Um, and that's how I took it. Training was that way for me. I remember there was a drill sergeant. He was a 19 Delta, and during, I sucked at shooting rifles. I think there was one time where I probably shot like 8 hours straight because, I didn't grow up shooting rifles, man. I was in the streets. I was doing dumb stuff, but I wasn't shooting no rifles. So took me about 8 hours to zero. And then, I'd always do like two in the center and one out, always, trigger squeeze and stuff like that. But my breathing was off, whatever the case may be. And, I remember hearing a beeping sound in my ear the entire time, like after the range, I was like, beep. And but back then, I mean, it was valid, right? It was necessary for us to kind of learn to, just shooting skills, because again, I didn't have that. So um it was a good time. I remember when we get off the bus, they're yelling at you. You have your bag, you have a bag on your back, you have a bag in front, you have your hat like punched, you have your face punched into the duffel bag. They're like, don't look up, because I guess you're not supposed to see like the route to get to, to your BCT location. And they had another duffel bag, already taken from us, and they had like a big old pyramid when you fall down. So when I get on the bus, they start telling you like 1, 2. If I tell the drill sergeant in the front start speaking and saying like, hey, I'm gonna count you guys off when you get off the bus. You're gonna get 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the platoon that you're going in. All right, and the thing is, like, I think it was like 1, 2, 3, 4 the way the platoons were meant, but my mind, right, when I heard it, it's chaos at the moment, so it was one. I was thinking like one, or no, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, like in that sequence of platoons, but I thought it was like 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I get off the bus, they're like 4. They told me number 4. So I grab, and they're, we line up with the platoon, and then they're like, all right, we'll get your bags. And then, but, I'm over here running around looking for your bag, because the bags were in a pyramid, and everybody's like running around, and they would count down, and you do push-ups, and then, you count down, and then they give you, hey, get up, and you could try to get your bag, and it's chaos, right? It's flutter kicks, it's, all these different things, and, the drill songs were funny. I mean, they were cracking on everybody. It was a good old time, man. And at the moment in time, like, I was really good at following directions. Like, at that time, again, my rebellious phase, all that kind of went away. Life experience taught me, like, when you're a manager or supervisor somewhere, you tell them to do something, you, as a manager supervisor, you kind of know that you're not asking them to do anything crazy. You're asking them to do something for the business, for the company. So I understood, like, I guess, in a way, when the drill sergeant told me to do something, it was for the betterment of me and for the team. And I always took it that way. So even as I was getting smoked, I always thought about it that way. Like, hey, they're just training you to be, to save your life. And that's how I took it. And whatever instructions they told me, I just did to the T. Like, whatever it is, I was that soldier that if you told me, hey, stand right here, and don't move for 30 minutes, I would stand there for 30 minutes, because that's what my sergeant told me to do. Like, that was maybe the dumbest private error, but that's the way I was, man. That's I don't know. That's how dumb I was, I guess, or that's how smart I was. Maybe both, right? That's what it was. And, I was going through it, shin splints, trying to run around, doing all these different things, and just trying to be the best version of me, at that time. So fast forward, then I go into finance. So I chose finance as my job, again, life experience, thinking that if I do 4 years as finance, then I can go and work at a bank or something, do accounting, do something like that, but ended up not being that at all. Then I get to Charlie Detachment 15 Finance, and I deploy. I deploy with them. And at the time, my daughter was born, MJ, and they're small. Excuse me. And I go to Iraq, and 15-month tour to Mosul, and over there supporting 3rd ACR and a couple of group guys in the border of Erbil, and then some 88 Novembers in up in Zako in the border of Turkey. And that's kind of like the missions I had. Had a couple of the missions for moving money and things like that. And then eventually, during that deployment, again, that's when I decided to re-enlist to be an 88 November, which is transportation. And it was deployment was interesting, right? There was there's things that you find about yourself that you probably thought were normal or not normal, but become normal, right? Like gunfire, explosions, just the things that happen in the background that just become normal everyday things. Explosions. Finally getting into working out. So I got into working out there, going to the gym. So eventually, you finish that deployment. Then I come back to from deployment back to Fort Hood, Texas, and then I PCS to Virginia, Fort Eustis, finish my 80 November school, and then I become a 80 November. Then I deployed in March of 2010. Deployed to Afghanistan. And that's where my transportation experience started. Right, that's um, where again my management skills, the things that I learned as a manager and a lead supervisor, as just experience itself, because they told me I'm going to be in the ECP, right? And I had to come up with a system. To bring in these trucks, because we're in the middle of nowhere. There is a education barrier with the Afghanis. So I came up with a placard system, and I'll bring that up later. So I came up with a placard system, right? And the reason why, because it was very hard to tell them, or speak their language. So my team and the Afghan security there, we came up with a system for placards, and we came up with a number system. So then we would say, like, who would get the piece of paper, which would be a TMR. Would say, like, who the equipment belongs to that's in this truck. I would put a number 1 on a piece of paper, give it to my team, and then I would give them a piece of paper that had in a Sharpie, like a big old number 1, and then they would put it on their truck. And then the Afghani would be on the intercom, mutar number yak, mutar via, which is truck number 1, come in, yeah. And then zoot, 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 like they would say, zoot, zoot, which would be like fast, fast, like hurry up. So the guys, you would see them run to their vehicle to get it, right? And you do this for an entire year. You do that entire year of bringing in trucks, staging them, learn a little bit of Dari, like the numbers, and good morning, good afternoon. There's a guy there that probably didn't look like my uncle, but again, I think there was enough social intelligence enough to where I go, if I make these guys my well, not my friends, but at least to put a name to the face, and not so much just to being a soldier, then they might think twice to give information from us. So there was a guy named Guaid there, and he didn't look like my uncle, but it's like, hey, Guaid, Coco, but Coco is uncle. And then Martin Farsi, very good, Martin. So they call me Martin, right, instead of Martinez, because Nez means no in Dari. So then they always called me Martin. Martin, how you doing, man? That's how they would talk, right? And we got I remember there's time. I mean, there was really a lot of close calls there. But I can say that the difference between Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq was a lot of, again, gunfire in the background. We're in Mosul, in the middle of the city. This is 3rd ACR. Getting after it down there, us doing, convoys, doing Black Hawk missions, to, these little different locations. And, it was a cool experience, but there was more of a war feeling, right? And then in Afghanistan, in the rural areas that we were in, there was more of a pressure, because on a daily basis, we're in full armor, weapons at the low ready. We had our, Mat V with the saw gun up top, right, providing overwatch for us as we were, getting the documentation. So the pressure was different, but it was consistent, right? My pressure of violence in finance was just temporary, right? It was we're on base, right? And then the only time you kind of felt some type of rush of possibility of something happened to you was when you were on a convoy or in a Black Hawk. But then you were back on base. But in there, it was daily. I was at the gate, right? Daily, I was, providing security. I was bringing in these trucks, and so I can see, like, when my team, was, we got ready to redeploy. Again, they were, we were waiting for our replacements, but they were gonna show up late. So then, my team was kind of wanting to stay with me, because they were like, well, not everybody can stay, or some of us got to go. And I knew, as a leader, it was kind of a rough patch in the beginning, but towards the end, as an E5 sergeant, in Afghanistan, right, I learned a lot, taking care of soldiers, getting one promoted to corporal, giving them a chance to lead the missions, being a gunner, being, seeing how, these younger soldiers, were able to teach me a thing or two of how to, lead our team. So, I just took it that way, and we survived, right? We survived a year, and they left, and I stayed behind with I think another 6 guys that from my team, and we waited for the new team to show up. We trained them up for kind of left seat, right seat, right? We did a little rip, and then we flew out of Kuwait and did a little over a year, right, in Afghanistan, boots on ground, and we finished, right. So that was my tour, and at that time, I really, that was it for me. That was it, that was it. I'm getting out the army. I'm not doing this no more. I'm not doing this whole, Iraq, Afghanistan thing anymore. I did what I needed to do, right? I came in the army. I did my my deployment. And that's it. Like, there's no other thing for me to stay here, right, in the army. So I was getting out. So my unit was getting ready to go again to Afghanistan, and I had like about 8 months left in the army, and they moved me to a different unit. But as soon as they moved me to the different unit, I came out on orders to Korea, and I ended up going. I ended up going to Korea. Went to 551 ICTC, and great, just a great team. Command team was a command team. What you expect to have, of a commander. Males, females, commanders that were, that were about their soldiers, about taking care of their soldiers, and sometimes some NCOs take advantage of all that and get into trouble. In my case, I just stuck to the team that I hang around with, which was just a group of people that and I kind of dealt like it, and maybe it was a residue of Iraq and Afghanistan. So my trajectory was November 2007 I deployed to Iraq and came back January 2009. In March of 2010 I deployed to Afghanistan and came back March of 2011. Then in 2012 in August I was in Korea. So not too long ago, I just was back-to-back deployment. So then I just treated Korea like a deployment. I just went to work, ate at the DFAC, went to the gym. Rarely did I go out, and that was it. That was my routine. So I did the whole year in Korea. Then I'm PCS to Benin as a staff sergeant. I made staff sergeant in Korea. And that's when I became a platoon sergeant. I worked in SPO Trans and Armored Brigade in 3-3 up in Kelly Hill, which is the Sledgehammer Brigade. And I did that for a little bit of 2 years. I learned a lot as a SPO Trans. That's kind of like my very first really job as a SPO, as a transporter. Again, I spent most of my time more as a platoon sergeant. Again, I was a great leader. Went to ALC during that time, but I learned. I think it was at the time Colonel Costanza and Colonel Simmering. I mean, they're all generals now, but at the time they were all colonels, and I was a staff sergeant. And the transformation from ABCT to IBCT was no joke, right? Chief Lab was the MOB. Back then it was a Warrant Officer 1, back then in 3-3. And I learned, right? I learned a lot, about rail, about, HETs, about, timing, about, making sure, assets are there and not wasting people's time. Had a great truck master that just taught me a lot, and I've absorbed from all these different leaders. And eventually I went on and went to Korea again, to another movement control team. Shout out again to 665 MCT. And then that's again, right, what we're trying to get at is you do all these things, right? You do all these different paths. Again, going back to that, fast forward, these are the kind of the pathways I'm kind of going, right? I went initially, bad school, college, joined the military, loved finance, but finance was not my niche. Went transportation. Initially I thought, transportation wasn't my niche, right? Wasn't what I was looking for, right? But the service, right, was kind of the calling. And, it came to me, the service or being of service to somebody is, maybe why not me, right? If I'm the guy or I'm the person that has to take the bullet for my team, then I guess that's me. So I just never said no to anything, right? The first time I ever said no was technically in Benin. Because when I got there, I just had to re-enlist to go to Korea, came back, and I was supposed to deploy with the MCT, and I was like, man, I just came back from being in Korea. Like, I need some time, and I only have 8 months left in the Army. And that's why I ended up becoming a platoon sergeant, because they're like, well, we need a platoon sergeant. He'll be the platoon sergeant, and then that's it. But then I ended up re-enlisting. And again, for enough time to where I got looked at for sergeant first class. So that was kind of like the goal. The goal was like, if I don't make sergeant first class within under 12 years, then I'm out. And I was okay with that. I was okay with that. What's it called? With that. So then I get to finish my time in Korea. Probably, one of the things I loved about Korea goes back to the freedom of maneuver, where my team kind of allowed me to train the troops. Came up with an outstanding kind of like, training concept called the Spartan Challenge. For those that were in that time during the Spartan Challenge, I was about team building. Again, sometimes we are great at showing off what we can do individually, but as a team, can you build? Can you build up those people? If you're the head of this small team, can you bring these other peoples with you? And that was the whole purpose of the Spartan Challenge. Was we had a couple of studs in the team, but when you put them with let's say not so stellar performer, can they motivate those people to be as a team? And that was the whole goal. And then also you got warrior tasking battle drills complete, and that was a pretty cool concept. And we went from I think at the time 665 was really bad in the stats and the numbers of PTs and all these different competitions that these movement control teams kind of go through. And then we placed, right? We placed either second or third. We didn't place first in any, maybe one. I think it was all just second or third, but we placed, and I think that was kind of a positive. And it was all due to just being a platoon sergeant with 3-3. The Marne standard. I remember some of my team didn't like the fact that I always had them in uniform during the field. Like they were always they were all kitted up, because I was like, hey man, I don't care whoever else is. We gonna be kitted up because that's what it is. You gotta get used to wearing your gear. We're going to train, warrior tasking battle drills, while we're not just chilling out here, not doing stuff. I was that type of NCO, but it was because, it was those sergeant majors and NCOs I had in 3-3 that kind of built that in me. So I just took that as a purpose for my team in 665. And I left 665 and went to 3-4. And this is kind of like where I believe, again, right, going from being a screw up, and even as a young finance soldier, I screwed up as well as a soldier, but never got an ARC 15, never got any of that type of stuff in the military. And then now you find yourself as a sergeant first class. I went and took 3-4 to Europe, and went to Europe with them, and then again to Kuwait. Both different experiences, both different, outcomes. But at the moment in time, I was out for knowledge. Like if I accepted the niche that I was a good transporter, and I understood through being in 3-3, when I seen the ABCT to IBC transformation, and being at the SPO, and seeing what it took to move an entire brigade, out of Benning. Of course, Lab and his MOB NCO did a lot of the, technical stuff, but just seeing being at the railhead and knowing what that looked like, as far as what a tank, what a track, what needed to be done, PLSs, the pins, all these different requirements for rail. And then fast forward again, now we're doing the exact same thing in 3-4, and I'm going to the port. Did smaller port missions in Korea. Now we're doing a ABCT up in Beaumont, and then being able to see problems and finding solutions for them while you're at the port as a young staff sergeant. Just grouping all the hazmat certifiers, all the people there, and kind of figuring out, okay, this is how 29ers are laid out, and just getting this on ground knowledge. And you go to Europe, and not knowing what Europe was about or the lay of the land of the Europe, and then moving from Europe, Poland to Germany, and then just all these different experiences and these different requirements for these different countries, and learning like, okay, these are different. This is a different animal, right? Than just moving stuff in stateside. Getting them to Romania and then being stuck in Romania, but again, there were just like so many different experiences, right? And when I say like boots on ground, or just seeing the overall like what was going on at that moment in time, kind of reminds me of I don't know if you ever seen the movie Gladiator, where Russell Crowe kind of grabs the sand and kind of puts it in his hand, and I think the even part two, his son, I don't know the actor's name, but for that movie he kind of grabs the sand, right? And that's kind of like the same thing, right? Like when you are on ground, knowing what the dirt feels like, knowing what the requirements are, like understanding how that feels. um I could put myself in those shoes, in Europe, struggling with um having to go every day as a young staff sergeant, or kind of middle, well, actually, and at that time I was an older staff sergeant already. Having to go back to battalion commanders and sergeant majors and tell them, hey, sir, ma'am, we don't have trains today, and just seeing their faces, right? And understanding that frustration, because again, all these guys know that this is just another step to going home, right? We got to get out of this place to go to now another place, and then from then we redeploy. um and that's what I understood, right? Again, the niche, you find that niche. So then fast forward, we get to Kuwait, and this is a different animal. Right now, we're flying people everywhere. Different systems that you got to use. More, going back, it was kind of funny because now we were using the old standalone TCAIM system and learning TCAIMs again. The one that I learned, not the enterprise, and just kind of going. But the good thing about that, right, you kind of build off of what you've learned. So before, having to use TCAIMs and tips, right, to help this brigade redeploy with one printer and one computer, right? Entire ABCT from Graph. So for those guys that are in Graph right now, enjoying however it is right now, that's not how it was back then. And then doing the exact same in Kuwait, where the opportunity was there for our team to be able to do all those things from the printer, from one computer, and in the location for the brigade mode team. Um, and then again, knowing what that was. And then fast forward, I finished that deployment, come back, in between the Europe and Kuwait deployment rotation. There was an NTC as well, kind of dealing with all the NTC, enablers, and getting all their. I remember, again, these are just experiences of. There was a cork board in the 9/16th little location there, and I remember, I had just got, the 2x3 cards, and then putting dates on the top, and then each day I had a card that had like what units were leaving. Old school, kind of like, that's the same system I used when I was in 3-3, when we were getting ready to get these trains up, right? I built an entire train load on this big old board of cardboard, and train one had all the cue cards, all these 2x3s, all lined up and showed the train. And then it was just kind of like, as the train was, or to say, hey, you're calling for forward for this train, I would just grab all the cards, and then this is train one, and this is all and I would give that to whoever was tracking it, and be like, hey, these are all the vehicles that left. And then, if, for example, if whoever was pushing out and there was trucks, or a track that didn't go, they would let us know, and then I would keep that card and then put it into the next one, right? So again, there was accountability in this board, old school way of doing it. Did the exact same way in NTC. So just an old school way of when you didn't have anything, right? When you didn't have a tracker, that's all digital. You used whatever you had. And at the time, I kind of went back to the way that you do things, and it was visually appealing. So when people would come to the NTC little area and be like, hey, what's going off tomorrow? I'd say, look at the board, and they'd know right away, okay, this is all the units that are leaving. So all those experience, right, kind of build up into what the future held for me, the niche, right? Um, so again, fast forward, come back, and I want to, still be, a mob, right? And again, boom, that happens, right? I become a mob. I do, I'm in Korea, and guess what I do, right? Same thing, right? I just talked about in 3-3, I use this placard this 2x3 card, right? Well, then the placard system, right, comes from Afghanistan. And the reason why I created the placard system was because, again, right, there was some education barriers in Afghanistan where numbers they understood, right? But if you told them like a company, a unit, whatever, like this Afghani doesn't know what that is. And then even the other team in Daydadi 1 and 2, they had shapes like triangles, squares, and circles and stuff like that. So again, I used that same concept for deployment to Korea. So guess what we did? A placard system, and it was numbers. And number one, the first number was the priority. So that way, if they knew that very first number was like if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the units had a different priority number, and they're all in sequence. And then the second number was a location. So like 1 was Hovey, 2 was Casey, and 3 was Humphreys. And then the S at the end you could probably think what the S stands for. But either way, that's how it was. So then when people will look right at the container or vehicle, whatever it is, they looked at number 1, that's priority 1, number that's priority 2, that's priority 3. 1, second number is location, so it'll be Hovey, Casey, or Humphreys, and then again the S. And hazmat, of course, you didn't need that because there was already a hazmat placard on there. So the niches, right, there you go, right? The previous experience learned, from being on ground, you create something from the previous experience, and now you're using it fast forward as a warrant to redeploy from Korea. Because again, being able to just see a number, right, being able to see something, because the piece of paper was a large number, right? It wasn't like very small. I wasn't looking at there reading it. If you're going to read something, it might as well be an MSL label, right? I mean, I'm just talking transportation here. But either way, right, that's how it was. And so I created the system, and it went awesome. Like, it went, it was fairly easy to tell them, hey, team, I want all the number 1s to be staged here on the port. I want all the number 2s here. I want all the number 3s here. I want all the, I want all the number 1s. If you see number 1s on the very first number, that all has to go. All the S's were all combined in one location. Like when I started seeing things that, hey, this has an S, it's not supposed to be here, brought it up, and then they moved it to the right spot, right? So again, hazmat where hazmat was. So again, it made the port ops so easy, so smooth because of the placard system. Again, all experience. Then, you get to, the operational stuff, the things that you learn from just being consistently deploying, consistently on a rotation. So then, you learn all these different things, and I learned them all prior to becoming a warrant. So that's where I was trying to get out. You find these niches, and transportation was my niche. And that was kind of like what propelled, again, the decision to switch over, because I remember, when I got selected for, I was already a warrant officer candidate, a basic course, and Sergeant Major Ellis. I went and visited him down there at Eustis. He was the 7th group, or Sergeant Major. We had a talk because we met each other down in 4th ID, and he asked me. He asked that question. I was to a lot of people's eyes, a stellar NCO, and he asked that question, like, why did I decide to switch over? And one of the main reasons was because, what was I going to do with all this knowledge? What was I going to do with the ABCT to IBCT transformation knowledge? What was I going to do with the rotation to Europe knowledge, the Kuwait knowledge, the NTC? Like, my whole goal at the time was to be a first sergeant, right? And that's what I was trying to do. And everybody around me was like, why don't you become a warrant? So again, there was a niche, right? It was the lives task, the goal, right? The being of service, to understand that as a mobility officer, if your plan goes accordingly, ultimately, what does a support guy like me do? I support the infantryman. I support the combat arms guy, right? And if my plan built, based off of what I build, and provide it to the staff, and then the staff provide it to the boss, and the boss say yes, or I agree, this is how we're doing it, and all these different courses of action are feasible, right? They're all meant to be successful and complete the mission. Then you get those soldiers home on the timely manner, right? You get them to their home because you did all the work, you did all the analysis, you did all the breakdowns, and that is the key, right? The key is that you're always there to support the soldier. And a perfect example, right, of that is we're always making sure that we're doing right for that soldier and their family. So again, the niche, right? The niche of transportation, the beginning of service. And one of the things, again, that's fulfilling about the current position I have is being able to talk to multiple mobs, right? Not only in my AO, but they're, as they're kind of cycling through with their rotations, being able to talk to them, mentor them, tell them, and the biggest key for me is, again, knowing how it feels to be in Poland for, I wasn't in Poland that long, but, just knowing how it feels to be in Europe, knowing what it is to have to tell, the staff, the XO, like, hey, this plan isn't the way we planned it, and helping them trying to figure out like how to get out of there, and that's the thing, right? And then how they maneuver inside, and giving them those questions before, why, have you looked into this? Have you looked into that? When is this maneuvering, right? Because that's all part of just being, with experience, and knowing that you're the expert. So as we find ourselves at these life tasks of serving others, of building others. Again, that's always been my niche, right? Not only for transportation, but also, anytime I was a leader, I always try to build my team to be better at something, whatever that is. If it was physical, if it was, taking, the harder positions to better myself, to then I can then provide that information to others. Sacrifice, and that's what it's about. So again, if you find yourself kind of figuring out what these life niches are, the life's tasks, it's not going to be a direct route. It's going to kind of take you all over the place, right? I talked about like beforehand where I was a screw up, and then, going to college, and then, joining the military, and then, eventually, as I was in the military, finding a niche that I was good at. But ultimately, the whole goal, as it's kind of circles around, is always about helping others. And sometimes, that's what it's about. It's just seeing that you're part of a small piece of that person's life. Like, if, when I see on Facebook, Instagram, I see all, and even at work, even when I see, one unit leave from the AO I'm working in, you were part of that small piece. They did all the work. You're just a small piece of that. And the hope is that they left with something, right? Something that you're able to help them with. And if they're wanting to hear you, you tell them, give them a little advice, and that's it, So again, I continue to tell people, not only in the military, but also in life, like whatever that life niche is, whatever that goal is, the task, keep on grinding at it. Keep on trying to foresee yourself being part of that, because again, no one's gonna do it but you. And like I say in previous podcasts, and I'll say in this one, the world deserves the best version of you. You deserve to be the best version of yourself, because you owe it to yourself to be that person. And no one's going to do that but you. So I challenge whoever's listening today, if it's you find yourself, in this position where, you are currently a young soldier, a young sergeant, staff sergeant, senior, and you find yourself, getting close to, retirement, or finding, that you want to challenge yourself even more. The only way that you know if you're good enough is if by actually doing it. And again, my life story is that, right? It's coming through these harsh times, being that person that wasn't supposed to be pretty much anything that was supposed to kind of be whatever that the society, I guess at the time, or my environment was telling me I had to be. And I broke those chains, and now I'm where I'm at, and still to this day, I'm fighting all those stigmas of what I should be, or where I'm trying to do more. Why? Because again, um, not only is it about the military, but just in life in general. Like I want to be the best version of myself continuously, and then physically as well. So there's moments in time where I'm not feeling the best, not feeling the smartest, not I have my downs, I have my ups, but I just, again, take 5 minutes, 5 seconds, and I get back at it. Like, there's people back here that, no matter how hard my position is, or how hard my job is, or how hard I think life is, there's somebody out there that is looking at me, right, as, man, I wish I just had a little bit of what he had, and I don't see that. So again, look at yourself like the person in the movie, right, that you see, and you're like, man, that hero, right? See yourself as that hero in that movie. See yourself as a hero, and and you never know who that person that you're going to impact is. So again, if we're in this journey of mastery, we're in this journey of just being a constant professional. Understand that we're all human, and don't make idols. But again, you're gonna make some masters out there that gonna teach you something. So when you find yourself in those positions to learn, take those advantages, and that's what the next chapter is, right? The next chapter that we're gonna get on in the next kind of iteration is gonna be the apprenticeship. So again, that's kind of the next layer of this. I appreciate everybody for tuning in to the podcast. Again, I'm pretty much a nobody, but I guess for somebody I'm a somebody, right? And maybe that's just my mom and my dad, and my kids, and some of my good friends. Again, I for everybody that's listening and continue to support me, thank you so much. Again, I'm a kid from London, from immigrant parents. First generation born here in the United States. First person to graduate from college. First person in my family to join the military, first one to be an officer, right? So again, if you're that one where you find yourself being first and you want to reach out, man. Reach out to me, reach out to, whoever is your mentor. And I'll take the time, I'll take the time if it's on YouTube, or, if you hit me up on my Instagram, on Johnny Cinco Instagram, or, even comment on the the podcast on Apple, or whatever the case may be. It'll be me. It'll be me commenting. So thank you so much again for tuning in. So this is Johnny Cinco. Always a pleasure. And again, the next chapter will be about apprenticeship, and we'll get that one in the next one. So thank you very much for tuning in. Peace.